Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We will cover chapter 2 of Tawney, Religion and the Rise of Capitalism, but with supplements and background. So what's this book all about? It's basically about the process of social change in Europe, how it started with the Christian community and how it eventually became a secular modern society. So chapter 2 is about things which happened in the continent, that is in non in England, and basically it's about the Catholics and the split into the Protestants, and there were two types of Protestants, Luther and Calvin, who had differing attitudes towards the emerging business interests. So before getting to the book, we pause for some background. Why are we studying this? So basically it was Ibn Khaldun who started the study of process of social change. Basically history is a record of events. X happened and then Y happened and then Z happened. But the question is how to figure out the linkages, and not on a moment to moment basis that somebody fought a war and he conquered, so that is instantaneous change, but what is the long-term process of history which governs the rise and fall of civilizations? So this idea is original with Ibn Khaldun. And the basic framework to understand this is the theory of the process of historical change is that when you look at changes, societies which are undergoing changes, then you also find people who are trying to analyze this change and to put it to their benefit. And if the change is harmful to their class interests, they try to prevent it. But in order to be able to do that, they need to understand why the change is occurring, and that means that you have to have a theory of the change. And so so you have to study the history, and then you have to study the theories which people used to understand the change and to try to manage it. Because it was in the light of these theories that they generated a response, and it is their response that shaped history. So there is what we call entanglement. On the one hand, you have theoretical processes, the historical process. On the other hand, you have the theories. The theories are generated by history, but then they go on to shape history. So another big idea to understand is that history is a battlefield of ideas and ideologies. And the power of the idea lies in its ability to appeal to people. The larger the class of people that you can persuade to believe in an idea, the greater the social change. Ibn Khaldun started by saying that the driver of history is the process of, is the kins, the classes, the people who are united by blood ties. But today, it is ideas which create classes. All the believers of an idea are able to work for it. So in particular, the nation is a very important modern idea which creates an artificial community and persuades people to live or die for their nation. At a lower level, the power of a class depends on its ability to persuade other classes to join it, and that depends on selling them certain ideas, certain theories of history. So the book of Tawney is about 16th century Europe, and it's divided into three sections. The first section describes the economic revolution that was taking place. There was rapid growth in Europe, but instead of leading to prosperity, it led to a huge number of wars. And there were two major Protestant theologians whose responses to this change shaped the future. And this was Luther and Calvin. So these are the three sections of this chapter. The Catholic Church had theories based on a stable social order, and it was too fossilized, and it had entrenched interest in the existing social order, so it could not respond adequately to the changes that was taking place. So it got marginalized. So prehistory of this change, not covered in the Tawney, is that the Dark Ages of Europe started with the rise to power of Christianity and their exclusion of all other types of knowledge. They burned Library of Alexandria, they burned any intellectuals who were non-Christians, and they jealously guarded monopoly of knowledge. As a result, there was very little knowledge because all non-Christian knowledge was destroyed. Then the Crusades came about, and the Crusades, the Christians learned about the very advanced civilization of the Muslims, and they got an appreciation of knowledge. In the meantime, the 7th century old civilization of Islamic in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, was going through a process of degeneration and lapse into luxury, while the Europeans were young and barbaric, and they were able to capture Toledo in middle of the 11th century. This library had about 600,000 volumes, and there were 44 volumes of the catalog for this library. So for the first time, church having an appreciation of knowledge, instead of burning down this library, they started translating these volumes into Latin. So this beginning of inflow of knowledge into Europe was the start of the end of Dark Ages, but there was a big problem that the church faced. It could not acknowledge receiving knowledge from Islamic civilization, which was very much hated and despised and portrayed as the hostile and barbaric villains. So there were secret societies which came into effect. The church actually explicitly forbade translations of many types of things and forbade the publication of books, censored books. So secret societies came into existence to actually study and learn from this knowledge without attracting the attention of the church. Descartes was one of the beneficiaries of this, and he copied a lot of material from the Arabic scholars, from the Islamic scholars, but he could not acknowledge this because of the fear of the church. Many books are now coming out which show the influence of the Quran on European intellectuals. The Quran has a very revolutionary message. It emphasizes the seeking of knowledge. It rejects traditional knowledge and knowledge which just comes as inheritance. This was understood by many leading intellectuals in Europe, but none of them could acknowledge this source. Meanwhile, one of the great sources of the change in Europe was the conquest of Constantinople, and basically Europe became hemmed in on all sides by the Islamic civilization. Land routes over the Islamic civilization were lost. Venus became unimportant and insignificant, and the search started for ocean routes to bypass the Islamic empire. And one of these voyagers was Columbus, who opened up the Americas, and it opened up the way to a vast amount of wealth, which was one of the important factors in the change in 16th century Europe. There were a lot of factors which led to the reawakening of Europe in 16th century. On the one hand, there was this huge amount of knowledge flowing in from the Islamic civilization, and on the other hand, there was a huge amount of wealth flowing in from the Americas, which had been discovered and conquered. And there was support from theology. The Catholic Church said that any place that Christians discover belongs to them, regardless of whether or not it's inhabited. This basically church doctrine led to massive amounts of barbaric and violent and ruthless colonization of the globe. This inflow of wealth and knowledge upset the stable feudal order. The Catholic Church was allied with the sources of power and attempted to suppress and stop this change, but the commercial classes gained in power and eventually succeeded in creating radical change in European society. So the process of colonization rested on, initially it started with export of guns, whiskey, mirror, and clothes to Africa, export of slaves to the New World, who produced tobacco, and also sugar and silver and gold were shipped to Europe. So this set up a very profitable triangle, but the financial interest in Europe benefited the most. They would finance these voyages and extract money from the people who carried them out. So actually it was not the producers, it was not the workers. Columbus actually died broke and in debt, even though he had undertaken the voyages which led to this treasure, because he was financed on his voyages by investors, and then all the return that was produced was captured and more by the investors again. So it was finance which profited the most from this expansion of business. For a while, because of massive amounts of tolerance in the Netherlands for all types of opinion, Netherlands became the most prosperous land of Europe. They had heads of finance from all over Europe, and they also had inflow of knowledge from all different sources. And this enabled massive generation of wealth, because the financiers based in Netherlands could finance investments for all over Europe, and they could also finance wars all over Europe, and this was a major source of power and wealth. The split between the Catholics and Protestants led to about a century of religious warfare, which ended with the Westphalian Treaty of 1648. This religious warfare was of enormous importance for the future of Europe, because basically it led Europe to think of religion as a source of wars. And in the Peace of Westphalia, the tolerance became embodied, that each state could follow its own religion. No other state would force it to follow their own religion by warfare. And also the states guaranteed to allow religious freedom to the minorities within their state. But more than a century of warfare led to a military revolution in which the ability to finance warfare on a large scale was very important. In addition, technological, organizational changes in battle administration and a huge amount of battle experience was gained by European nations who were continuously at war with each other for more than a century. One of the key inventions of this period was the rise of finance, and the people who were behind the scenes, and they financed everything which was going on. The kings and the popes, they were all in debt to the financier who financed their bids for power, and they were able to control Europe like the puppet master controls the puppets on the strings. In fact, the Germanic banking houses had vast range of interests. They had their fingers in everything, in foreign expeditions, in military, in trade, in mining, in warfare, in banking and commerce. So basically, the rise of finance was the key to understanding European history, because they were in control of everything that was happening. When we see written history, we don't see the financiers. We see the kings and the princes and the wars, and the popes. But what is really happening in the background was the financing of all of these expeditions. And so it was the financial interests which were in control, but not visible. So as prosperity and money flowed in, the commercial classes rose to power. They were able to hire laborers, and the feudal society started breaking down, because the feudals could, the serfs could get better deals, and the merchant interest was in freeing the serfs to enable them to labor. So as the social structure changed, it was necessary to devise new theories. The Catholics were not involved, as we said earlier. They were too deeply embedded in the existing order. Among the Protestants, there was the Lutherans who wanted to turn back the clock. They were aghast at the changes that were taking place, and they wanted to go back to the old society. But Calvin wanted religion to regulate the new commercial interests. So this was the difference in attitudes between Luther and Calvin, which led to the rise of social theory in Europe. Initially shaped the rise of social theory. But later on, actually, the commercial interests broke free of the religious framework and led to an entirely different kind of social theory. The fact that the financiers were the biggest gainers and the largest power source meant that they got to control the theories of social change, which eventually came to dominate. So mercantilism is a theory of finance. Basically, it says that gold is the key to the power of nations. And at that time, that was an obvious fact, because the armies needed to be financed by gold, and warfare was the key to the period. So financiers understood that it is not gold itself, but trust that is valuable. If you promise to pay gold and people believe your promise, then you can make as much money as you like. So credit is what finance learned and to invent. And the invention of credit had a massive effect, that it liberated the financiers from the need to have a lot of gold. They could generate a lot of credit with a small amount of gold. And they could use this to control the states. And so basically the finance got embedded with state power. So sort of the last battle of the religious schools was the schoolmen who tried to construct a theory of economic thought based on church doctrines. And in fact, there was not too much difference between the Protestants and Catholics on their views about the social change. There were some minor differences, but these minor differences created the fissures which allowed the overthrow of the entire religious approach to economics. Instead of having economics as a branch of moral philosophy, it became a part of secular modern thinking, supposedly liberated from its religious roots. So in the 16th century, you see the seeds of all of the major capitalistic institutions which eventually came into existence in full-blown form. And these seeds were coming out of the medieval organization. So if you want to understand change, you have to see that the same institutions which worked in the medieval society start to change their functions and change the ways of operations and change the morality and the underlying purposes. So for example, in medieval society, it's not permissible to seek profits at the expense of your brothers, but eventually in a capitalist society, seeking profits is the purpose for doing business. So of the two reactions, the Catholics did not want change. Martin Luther basically let go of the world. He said that business of religion is to watch out for spirituality, let the princes take care of the world. So basically he abandoned the field of commerce, and he said that true religion doesn't have much to do with the affairs of this world. And so basically that created a vacuum, that where is this new social theory going to come from? Now the doctrine of the commercial class was purely profit. Gold is a treasure, and the one who has it has everything he needs, which includes saving souls and includes getting to paradise, because actually the Catholics were selling paradise in return for money. So the doctrine of the commercial class was actually the one that eventually became dominant. But in the intermediate period before before the ascendance of the secular modern wealth is everything view, Calvin was the person who wanted to control commerce according to religious affairs. So basically his was the religious response which became the dominant view, because religion did not let go of minds so easily. And so basically the model of Calvin's religion was produced in Geneva, in which the consistory, which was a body of reverends and laymen, they controlled the society according to strict religious rules. And that was the model, that the Calvinist model for how religion should handle business. The Calvinist approach to commerce was extremely harsh and unflexible, which is why it could not survive. It involved systematic use of torture for people violating religious boundaries. A child was beheaded for striking its parents. 150 people were burned at the stake for being heretics. Basically, the problem was that Christianity as a religion was not equipped to deal with commerce, unlike Islam, which was from the start had specific guidance on how we should do business. So when Christianity had to cope with the emergence of strong business interests, they had no clue as to how to go about it. And because all of the attempts failed, so the commercial class came up with its own religion, which was the worship of gold, basically. So the chapter 2 of Tawney basically tells us that Catholics, Protestants, everyone was united in opposition to change. Only Calvin had a small opening for religion, and this small opening for commerce, and this small opening was eventually became the floodgates through which commercial doctrine entered into Europe and eventually eliminated religion from the domain of commerce. In the long run, the book is about how all of religion got rejected from the realm of business, and instead of the Catholic saying that love of gold is the root of all evil, the lack of wealth is the root of all evil became the motto of the modern age. And so this defeat of Christianity led to the rise of secular modernism, which has no morals. And this has been a tragedy for all of humanity, because it is possible to conduct business within a moral framework.